Hey there. Hi, everybody. Hi, it's Natalie. Thank you and welcome. Glad to be with you here on this. What the hell is it? It is Thursday night. Oh my gosh, I can't even remember what night it is. I'm like a mad scientist today. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure the video is up and running. One moment while I look into that. DG. DG. Hi there, my friend. Hi there. And hi to everybody who will join in. And the idea to do this chart was actually the idea of one of the subscribers of the channel, whose name is DG, who's here in the chat. Yay, you're here. And hopefully we will get all of the mystery of this solved. And tonight I'm going to talk about the day the music died, which for those of you who are younger, you maybe never heard about that day too much, but the day the music died is the day that three major influential artists were killed in a plane crash, leaving a show in Clear Lake, Iowa in 1959. And it was huge news at the time because there were three artists on that flight, on that four-seater plane, that perished in that flight that night, that took off in the blizzard in the middle of the night, that crashed into a cornfield in Iowa. And those three hugely influential musicians who've influenced the Beatles, Carlos Santana, Jimi Hendrix. A lot of people say without Buddy Holly, there'd be no Beatles. And I mean, huge. They've just influenced so many musicians all over the world and tons of artists all over the place. And they were kind of like the first rockers. So if we want to talk about like hillbilly or like rock, not hillbilly, but rockabilly and rock and things like that, were just starting to pick up at that time. We had Elvis, we had Buddy Holly, we had the Beatles, and these were like the first rock artists that we really had back in the day, leading into the 1960s. And at the time, they were like, just hitting their prime, really. Buddy Holly was only 22 years old when he died in that plane crash. Ritchie Valens was only 17 years old, and the Big Bopper was 28 years old. So they were all very, very young, and they had like so much potential. And just even in the short time that they had their careers, like hugely influenced the musical world and the world of artists and performers. And let me go ahead. I am going to share my little screen here. And I am going to get this thing out of here. And you guys might remember a song by Don McLean from 1971 called The Day the Music Died. Actually, no, it was called American Pie. My bad. I'm sorry. It was called American Pie by Don McLean. And the whole song is about that fatal car crash in February of 1959 and about the deaths of Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Ritchie Valens. And for those of you that are familiar with La Bamba or the movie La Bamba or the song La Bamba, Ritchie Valens didn't write that song, but he really popularized that song. And Ritchie Valens, in fact, is known as like the father of like Chicano rock. And so it's quite interesting with these three. But if you guys ever heard that song, Bye Bye Miss American Pie, drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. And them good old boys were drinking whiskey and rye, singing This'll Be the Day That I Die. That song, like I said, was written. If you know that song, you know what that's about. Now, the day the music died, like I said, I'm just going to read a little bit about this so you guys can be up on the history here. And it says, on February 3rd, 1959, rock and roll musicians Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper were all killed in a plane crash near Clear Lake, Iowa, together with pilot Roger Peterson. The event became known as the day the music died, after singer-songwriter Don McLean referred to it in his 1971 song, American Pie. At that time, Buddy Holly and his band, consisting of Waylon Jennings, Tommy Alsop, and Carl Bunch, were playing on the Winter Dance Party Tour. So they were on this Winter Dance Party Tour in the Midwest at the time, and they were trying to make money, is what they were trying to do. But what happened was, like in the 1950s, all they had to go around to all these different towns in the Midwest that were like freezing cold. Now, keep in mind, this is February, and in the Midwest, it is freezing cold in the Midwest during that time, like 30 below. And they were going around on this rickety old bus, and the bus kept breaking down. And it was so bad that one of Buddy Holly's band members got frostbite on his feet, and they were miserable. There was a bunch of them at this winter dance party. I thought I had a winter dance party. Let me show you guys the winter dance party. Where do we have that? Oh, well, anyway, the winter dance party. I was going to show you guys a poster from it, but basically it was just like the winter dance party was Buddy Holly and a bunch of other musicians going around to different cities in the Midwest performing, and then getting on these rickety old buses that kept breaking down in the middle of nowhere, to the point where they thought they were all going to die of like freezing cold and frostbite. But and they said that they didn't have anywhere to do their laundry, like their suits that they would play in, like smelled horrible. I mean, the tour just sounds awful. They actually call it the tour from hell, because the tour was extremely poorly organized. Like the way that they were going around to the different cities didn't make sense. It was freezing cold. They were in a rickety old bus. It kept breaking down. Like it was just horrible. And by the time they got to Clear Lake, Iowa, Buddy Holly was so sick of, going around in that rickety old bus, and wanted to charter a plane to take them to the next destination, which was a couple hundred miles away, instead of going on that rickety old bus. And there was 3 seats open for the plane. And originally Buddy Holly was going to take his 2 band members, but he ended up taking Ritchie Valens on the flight, and also the Big Bopper on the flight instead. And I'll talk about those reasons why later, but those were the 3 that were on the 4-seater plane, along with the pilot. And so they got onto a plane at 12:55 a.m. To fly, but the weather was very bad. It was snowing, and the pilot couldn't see very well, and the plane ended up crashing 5 minutes after they took off, and everyone passed away in the car crash. And so it's a very DG says, I had a huge spiritual moment with this whole event and this song in January 2022. Oh my gosh. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I mean, so many people were touched by this event. And even, to this day, what is it now? Like 80 years later, we're still talking about it. It's still a big deal. And it is a huge part of history. And luckily, there was time charts for all of these events. So there was a time chart for the exact moment the plane took off. Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Ritchie Valens all have highly rated birth time information. They're either A or AA rated. So we've got some good data to work with here. So it was like the perfect case study. So I just want to show you guys a picture here. There's Buddy Holly. Look at the glasses. Can you guys believe it? He's a Virgo. He just looks like a Virgo. I'm going to show you guys all of them. But these are the 3 that perished in the crash. And this was Buddy Holly, 22 years old. This was Ritchie Valens, the one famous for La Bamba. He was only 17 years old when he perished in the crash. And then the Big Bopper, who we'll talk about him as well too. So these were the 3, plus the pilot, that died that night. So I think I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the chart for the night that the plane went down. And yeah, wow. Oh my gosh, DG, it opened a spiritual door for me in terms of channeling and facing fear. I mean, for them to get onto a plane that late at night when it's snowing and cold like that, I don't know, I mean, it's just pretty crazy. But then the thought of being on that old rickety bus and it breaking down. And, the interesting thing is that like a lot of people had flus and colds at the time because they got really sick because they were going from destination to destination, not even resting, and then traveling in like 30 below degree weather. So everybody, there was multiple people that had colds and flus. And we'll talk about that influence as well. So let's go ahead and look at the chart for the night that the plane went down. So I'm going to start with this chart for the moment that that plane took off. And that will be the event chart. So this is the event chart for the moment that that fated flight took off. And then we're going to look at the charts of Buddy Holly compared to this chart. We're going to look at the Big Bopper's chart, and we're going to look at Ritchie Valens' chart, and we're going to compare them to this event chart. So it's going to be super cool. Okay, so the day the music died, what is so interesting. So first of all, let's talk about Neptune and the fact that this is a Scorpio rising chart, okay? And they took off in the dead of the night, 12:55 a.m., okay, in Clear Lake, Iowa, and three major musicians, three hugely influential musicians on that flight, along with the pilot. Now, the pilot was only 21 years old, and the pilot had been working a 17-hour day before he got Ritchie, the Big Bopper, and Buddy Holly on that flight. So he was exhausted, but he agreed to take the flight. And the entire cost for all three was $108, which is equivalent to over $1,000. And it wasn't that long of a flight. So probably the pilot was like, I'll take it, I can make some extra money, but he'd been working 17-hour days. And although the pilot was licensed and only 21 years old, the instruments that plane had, he had not been certified in yet. He was certified and he had his flying hours, but not in the specific flying instruments that were on that plane. And so the pilot was severely like tired and, worked a 17-hour day and wasn't really well versed in operating that particular type of plane. And so you can see already there's a recipe for disaster here. And it's the middle of the night, 12:55 a.m., and there's snow coming down. It's freezing cold and hard to see. It was hard to see at that point. And a lot of people say that the pilot was thinking that he was ascending when he was really descending, and the right wing of the plane hit the ground and the whole thing, everyone was killed instantly. But there was a lot of talk about, was this pilot actually prepared to like fly this airplane? Only 21 years old. And now when we think about pilots in astrology, we want our pilots to have a good, strong Mercury, right? We have this Mercury in Aquarius in the third house. Third house is a house of travel, right? And you'd say Mercury in Aquarius is good for a pilot. I want my pilot to be sharp and smart and, well-learned. And, Mercury is a sign of like very clear-headed analysis. Like when you have a pilot flying a plane, it's like, okay, they better know what all these buttons do and how to do this and the mechanics of everything. So you want a good, strong Mercury if you're taking a flight, right? Well, here's the problem with this Mercury is that this Mercury is in a really tight square to Neptune, which is rising on the ascendant. And so, we see a confused pilot, or we see where people aren't using the best of judgment. And we also see where the pilot maybe was not able to see too well what was going on, because Neptune can definitely create like optical illusions. And somebody watched the plane take off and said it looked like in the distance, like the wing was coming down, but they thought, oh, it's just an optical illusion. It's not anything. I'm not going to do anything about it. Like it seems fine. And so there was just a whole optical illusion type of a thing going on. And, it's interesting not to like go too crazy on the Titanic, but when they couldn't see the iceberg and they saw it at the very last minute and, the communications were all messed up. It was a very Neptunian night when that happened on the Titanic. And sometimes when you see like event charts for plane disasters or, disasters at sea, you see like a messed up Neptune, or you see Mercury, Neptune, confusing, pilot doesn't know what to do. The pilot was also supposed to get back with a flight plan after being in the air for 5 minutes, and he never got back with the flight plan. So nobody knew what was going on really, and they didn't discover the crash until the next morning. So already we see like there's confusing details here. Nobody really knows what's going on. The pilot's vision at the moment of the takeoff or into the takeoff wasn't really good. They said the pilot was known for having vertigo issues at times too. So we've got Mercury, Neptune, not really, you don't want your pilot to have vertigo issues, so there's some issues there. Now, the interesting thing is that Neptune is on the ascendant. And as I mentioned, everybody, like for instance, the Big Bopper who was on that flight had a really bad flu and cold at the time. Pilot was exhausted. Neptune can be associated with draining on the vitality or draining of the health. And so people were tired, exhausted, couldn't see straight, late at night, vision obstructed, all these types of things going on. Also, look at that sun is also in a square to Neptune. So everybody was feeling pretty weak, tired, not feeling too well, feeling sick, not doing well. And so we can kind of already tell the vibe of what was going on that night. Now, from that point, I want to keep going here. Okay, I also think it's interesting because Neptune is associated with omens, predictions and omens. And it was funny because right before that flight, one of Buddy Holly's bandmates was supposed to be on that flight, but instead he gave his ticket to the Big Bopper because the Big Bopper was sick. And he gave it over to the Big Bopper, but he was annoyed because he didn't want to go on that bus. And so he told Buddy Holly, I hope your old plane crashes. And then Buddy Holly said, I hope your old bus, dies on the side of the road. And they were just kind of like, riffing or, being fun with each other, but then it ended up happening. And the guy that told him I hope your plane crashes, because he wanted to be on the plane, but he couldn't be, felt really bad after that. And he said that comment haunted him for years. And so we see that Scorpionic rising with the Neptune. We see that kind of like spooky prediction aspect of what was going on behind the scenes there. And we see the bodily weakness, the sickness, people not feeling well, foggy, haze, disoriented, lost, distracted. There was snow blowing everywhere, hard to see, very Neptunian conditions at the moment that flight took off. Now, the other thing that I want to mention is that the ascendant of this event chart is at 10 degrees Scorpio, which is in the Via Combusta. And the Via Combusta in astrology is something we use a lot in horary astrology. But it's said that when you're looking at like a horary astrology, which this isn't a horary chart, but I found it interesting. It just kind of popped out at me. The Via Combusta is from 15 degrees Libra to 15 degrees Scorpio, and it's a portion of the zodiac where it's called the burning way or the fiery path. And it was said to be a very malefic zone of the zodiac because the sun and moon were both in fall sun's in fall in Libra, moon's in fall in Scorpio. And so, we have our two luminaries in fall there, but we also have a bunch of fixed stars in between 15 degrees Libra and 15 degrees Scorpio that are very malefic. And so that part of the zodiac was always looked at as a bad omen or looked at as, something that, like if you had a horary chart, an event chart, or a horary chart where a question was asked and you were in the Via Combusta, you would tell that person it's not safe to judge this matter, or nothing good is really going to come of it, or we shouldn't be asking this question right now because the ascendant is in the via combusta. And so that was one interesting thing that I noted, is this ascendant is in the via combusta. It is on the burning way or the fiery way. And we can say that this area of the zodiac brings bad luck due to the presence of numerous malefic fixed stars in that area. So it brings bad luck. Now, what's interesting is we also have Jupiter in the first house here, but look at that Jupiter in Scorpio. Now, normally Jupiter in the first house, you go, yay, right? But this Jupiter is at the 29th degree, at the anaretic degree, and it is opposing Mars. And so we will be talking a lot about this Mars-Jupiter problem, because it's going to come up multiple times in their own charts too. And yeah, DG says, yeah, I wondered if it was a less than positive Neptune influence. For sure. Absolutely. Oh, thank you, DG. Thank you so much. So basically, we have some things going on. So, Mars is not, and this Mars is in detriment, and it's not a great Mars in the first place. And it's opposing this Jupiter. So we don't really like that, first of all. And then the next, you guys are going to die when you see this. I was like, oh my God. So this chart is called The Day the Music Died. And this is what that song was written about, and the whole cultural influence. Now, as I said before, this Jupiter in Scorpio at 29 degrees is very powerful. And no doubt these musicians had huge cultural impact on the artistic scene forever. I mean, Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, the Big Bopper, like they all had huge impact on many major artists to come. And so we see that that's a powerful Jupiter. But we can also see like, oh, it might be lucky, but opposition Mars, maybe not so much lucky. Now, the thing I wanted to point out here too about the day the music died. So when we think about music and we think about art, what planet would we think of? We'd think of Venus, right? Venus is the planet of art, love, beauty. Venus represents artists, musicians, painters, all types of art. Now, this Venus is at 3 degrees Pisces, and Venus is exalted in Pisces. It's a powerful position for Venus. But notice this Venus is in an exact opposition to Pluto. Can you guys believe that? The literal title of this event that everybody calls about is The Day the Music Died. Can you believe that? When I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh. The planet that represents musicians and artists is opposing Pluto, the planet of death and rebirth. Wow. Okay. So, and then the other fascinating part of it is this Venus is also at 3 degrees Pisces. And I'm like, oh my God, it was a trio of 3 that died, right? It was Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper. And we have 3 degrees of Pisces opposing Pluto at exactly 3 degrees Virgo. Like, it just blew my mind. I was like, 3 people, 3 artists, 3 people died. The day the music died. Whoa, mind blown. So I was like, whoa. Yeah, I completely got chills too when I saw that, DG. I was like, what is going on? Like, mind blown. And so the music really did die that day. It really was like 3 prolific, amazing, wonderful artists were, taken from us on that day. And they actually called the tour, that winter music festival, that winter dance party, they actually called it the tour from hell. And look at that Pluto in the 10th house there on the night of the accident, right? Look at that, the tour from hell, right? The 10th house being career, etc. Okay, so it truly was, like artists, musicians opposite Pluto, the tour from hell. And so that is something very interesting that I noted. And let me also tell you guys about, I want to tell you guys about the moon here as well, too. So, but before I talk to you guys about the moon, because whenever we look at an event chart, the moon is highly important, right? And this moon in Sagittarius, when I show you guys how this moon in Sagittarius repeats and repeats and repeats in every one of these charts at about that same degree, you're going to be like, what the heck? Okay. And of course, the moon in Sagittarius, we could literally interpret that as wanting to travel, Sagittarius wanting to travel in more comfort, the moon representing comfort. So it's like, I don't want to be in that rickety old bus, like freezing to death and getting frostbite. I want to just get in this plane and go to the next destination and wash my clothes and do my laundry and, sleep in a warm bed, right? I want to travel more comfortably. And so you'll see this moon in Sagittarius repeating and repeating in nearly every chart that we looked at. It's a highly interesting moon in this chart. And this moon is void, of course. And so we will talk about what that means in a minute. But before I do that, I just want to tell you guys too, something about the wives of Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper. So both of the wives were pregnant. And Big Bopper's wife was 7.5 months pregnant. She had a baby 2 months after her husband died in that plane crash. And then Buddy Holly's wife was also pregnant too. And unfortunately, she miscarried right after that accident happened, like very sad. But 2 of the men on that flight had, wives that were pregnant. And one of the wives was very, very pregnant. And so I think it's interesting because, traditionally in astrology, the 5th house rules children. And of course, Pisces is the ruler of the 5th house here. Jupiter is the ruling planet of Pisces. And so, one thing that I was always taught in astrology, and if you look at definitions of like Mars-Jupiter combinations, it can represent a completed birth or the first cry. And what we had here, especially with the Big Bopper, was a very, very pregnant wife who was going to go into labor shortly after that accident. And I think it's very interesting that the ruler of the 5th house of children is at Jupiter 29 degrees Scorpio opposition Mars, because to me, that is like a pregnant lady that's ready to pop. And so I think that that's very interesting as well, especially since Jupiter rules the 5th house of children. And also Mars is the ruler of the ascendant. So it's like, this is a real crisis situation. And, of course, the Big Bopper never got to meet his son because he passed. And then Buddy Holly's wife miscarried that baby right after the crash. So very interesting there as well. And so I found that as well. Now, the other thing I want to mention too is just the placement of the sun and Mercury here in Aquarius in the 3rd house. Okay. And of course, Mercury is ruling the 8th house, which represents, death and accidents and things like that. And that Mercury is in an opposition to Uranus. Now, Mercury is in the 3rd house, which represents transportation, short journeys. And then we see Uranus opposite Mercury in another house, the 9th house of travel. And we see that kind of like, the ruler of the 8th house opposing Uranus in the 9th house. We see that sudden change in plans that was happening at the last minute to charter that flight. And then we see like the sudden accident of that happening as well. We also see the ruler, or we see the ascendant at 10 degrees Scorpio in a square to this Uranus at 14 degrees Leo retrograde. So Uranus is a big factor. And I would expect that Uranus would be a big factor in like a very sudden, accident. And also that Mars would be a very big factor too, because anytime, like, I don't know if you guys remember when we had the implosion of the submarine that went to the Titanic, that was a Mars-Uranus event for sure. Like a Mars-Uranus square was popping off during that event. And so we see Mars-Uranus coming up a lot with accidents that are happening. And we're going to see it over and over in each one of the individuals' charts as well, too. But this ascendant is squaring Uranus, and we see the 3rd house and 9th house of travel really being activated in the change of plans and the suddenness of everything. So that information is there, too. Now, let's take a look at, I want to talk about the moon because this moon here, this moon in Sagittarius, we're going to see it over and over and over again. And anytime, like I said, the moon is a very sensitive point. It changes signs and positions very, very quickly. And we see like a literal interpretation, like I said, of them wanting to travel in more comfort and not be on that rickety old bus anymore, and them being willing to pay money to do that. We see moon and the tickets to get on that plane were not cheap, by the way. And somebody said each person had to pay Buddy Holly for their ticket. And one guy said the $38 ticket was the same dollar amount as his parents' rent. And so a lot of people were like, no, thanks. Like $38 in 1959 was a lot of money. That was equivalent to like $400, $500, which was somebody's rent money. So people were like, no, thanks, but some people wanted to travel in a little bit more comfort and pay the money to do that. And so we see that going on. And so this moon void of course, I just want to talk a little bit about a void of course moon, because the last aspect that this moon had made was with Uranus, this trine to Uranus right here. And, we can see the change in plans, the changing in the travel plans and all of that. But the moon's not really making any more aspects until it gets into Capricorn. The only thing that it would aspect is Chiron, and that doesn't count because it's not a planet. So the moon is really just sitting there, void of course, at 16 degrees Sagittarius. Now, I also want to talk about, you guys, I have to get a tarot card out here. For those of you that know tarot, not terror, but tarot, keep the 9 of Wands in your head right now. Like think about the 9 of Wands and what the 9 of Wands looks like. And I'm going to, I should have had it pulled up on the screen, so I apologize, but I am going to pull up the 9 of Wands. If you guys don't mind hanging with me for a second while I do that. Where are you? Oh, there you are, 9 of Wands. Okay. You guys know the 9 of Wands, right? It's the person with the bandage on their head and the 9 wands behind them, and they look freaking exhausted, right? You guys know the 9 of Wands. And yeah, DG 108 is an interesting number. 108 is like a hugely important number in obviously like in Vedic traditions, but this 9 of Wands. So you guys know the 9 of Wands from the tarot. So each tarot card is associated with a placement in the zodiac. Like the 9 of Wands is associated with the moon in Sagittarius. So this moon in Sagittarius at 16 degrees Sagittarius is actually representing this 9 of Wands. So here's how they felt. They felt like the 9 of Wands. Tired, don't want to go on, sick of the same old thing, wanting to try something new, wanting to get out of a situation, possibly, annoyed with having to do the same thing, physical health, it is the Lord of great strength. And so there is a lot of strength in the 9 of Wands too, spiritual warrior, etc. But it's a tired looking energy. Whenever you get fire at the lower end of the tree of life, things are getting tired. And because fire isn't meant to be on the bottom near the earth. Fire is supposed to be, up in the air. But so the 9 of Wands is looking tired. You guys know the 9 of Wands. So that moon, the astrological position of that moon corresponds with the 9 of Wands. Now, for those of you that study astrology, that moon also has very little essential dignity. And I don't bring essential dignity a lot into natal chart readings, but definitely more into event charts and horary charts and things like that. But the moon only has 1 point of essential dignity for being in phase. And when we talk about essential dignity, we're saying, like, is this planet strong or is it weaker? Or does it have strength? Is the moon having a lot of strength at 16 degrees Sagittarius? And really, it only has 1 point of essential dignity, which is almost like nothing. And so it's not really showing, it's void of course, and it only has 1 point of essential dignity. And if we look at, it's in the decan of the moon in Sagittarius. So it's weak in a lot of ways and void of course. And so, the moon in Sagittarius is wanting, and I'm not saying the moon in Sagittarius in general is weak. If you have that in your chart, we're talking essential dignity right now, but I'm just saying the moon in the moon is trying to get, moon in Sagittarius is trying to get somewhere quicker and get somewhere. And it's a little restless of a moon, but is trying to get to comfort or get to a place of safety with the quickness, and is willing to kind of change plans in order to do that. And I wrote here, moon in Sagittarius trying to get somewhere quickly without all the hassle, and doing so with greater levels of comfort. But when the moon is void of course, and the moon isn't making any aspects really to anything, and it's finished its last aspect, then, astrological wisdom will tell us when the moon is void of course, that is a time to rest and relax. It's a time where we may have like more brain fog, a time where we may need more naps. We may be feeling kind of more unproductive when the moon is void of course. It's a good time to chill and relax. We could be feeling a lot more lost or hazy or scatterbrained during void of course moons. Decision making may not be at its finest, and it can lead to this whole energy of kind of like going nowhere. And so it's best to just rest and get the pampering that you need and then move on. So I also think that void of course moon was making them want to like rest more and pamper themselves more and take it easy more and get to their destination with more comfort and quickness than they could riding in that rickety old school bus. And DG says the 9 of Wands. I always intuit when the war is over. Yeah, when the war is over, like what's left? How do I feel? How do I pick up the pieces? Definitely, right? And so that moon is void of course. It has very little essential dignity. So, it's not a time where they really want to, it's kind of like, I want to take the easy way out this time. I just, and Buddy Holly had been trying to charter a plane that entire night. Like he was all over it, trying to charter a plane that entire night. And so like, he was just going and going, trying to find something, because it's like, I can't take it anymore. I can't be in this crappy school bus. They were literally making a fire in the back of the bus to stay warm. It was like so bad. And, it's like, I can't do this anymore. I'm tired of traveling, right? 9 of Wands. I'm tired of traveling. I need to rest. I can't do this anymore. It's too much, and so that's going on there. And so we could also, I think I also mentioned the ruler of the 8th house in this event chart opposite Uranus. So we're looking at like a very sudden death or a sudden, thing that happened very quickly. Ascendant is square Uranus. I think we kind of went into, and I just want to say about Mars Jupiter too. Mars Jupiter can definitely represent restlessness, overexertion, and acting in haste. So it's kind of like, we've had enough, we want out of this. We can't take this anymore. And, like we're up to our limits with everything, and we need things to be easier now. And we need to do something different here. And everyone on that tour was overexerted and tired. Okay. And so not a great situation. Now, I also, Mars Jupiter can kind of be like, nothing will happen to us, right? And keep in mind, all the people on that flight were in their 20s, except for Ritchie Valens was 17 years old. Even the pilot was only 21 years old. So it's kind of like, we're invincible. Nothing can happen to us, right? We're young men that have the rest of our lives. Nothing bad can happen to us, right? So let's just go ahead and take the risk and do it. But obviously it didn't work out. And, just kind of taking the risk and going for it is very much, like a Mars Jupiter kind of overestimation of your abilities in the situation. And I also think that 21-year-old pilot also overestimated his own abilities as well, too. And, sometimes Mars is, representing men and young men. And sometimes there's that need to kind of be like, well, I can do that, like, sure, I want to do that. Like the pilot kind of like, I can take that on. Sure, I can take that on after a 17-hour day, yeah, I can man up and do it. And it's like, yeah, no, you need to, they would have been much better on the rickety bus that night. And so that Mars is also debilitated as well in Taurus. And so we can see like just the exhaustion, they're tired, they're sick of it. And so also, I just want to talk a little bit about that Jupiter in Scorpio. So just in general, Jupiter in Scorpio can represent fierce purpose, confrontation with mortality. Okay. It also, Jupiter in Scorpio, especially at 29 degrees, can really talk about honoring the dead. And, there has been so much honoring of Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Ritchie Valens. Like they have been so honored, and rightfully so. But you can see like what titans and powerhouses they became, and how their like influence and is like so greatly felt and so powerfully felt. Like these are powerful figures who became like gurus to other musicians. And that's what Jupiter is. Jupiter is like the guru. And people still go back to that spot in Clear Lake, Iowa every year to like honor them and, everything. So they're very honored. Their memories have been very honored, which I also think is very much a Jupiter in Scorpio type of thing. And they were kind of coming into the height of their power, and they were just cut out. Mars, that energy of cutting, they were just kind of cut out right as they were about to meet the height of their power and really get somewhere. And so that is very interesting too. But I do think they were in over their heads with that Mars Jupiter opposition. I do think they that tour really put them in over their heads in a lot of ways. And, what's interesting is all three of them could have become like very rich, wealthy, and famous. And, Buddy Holly was already pretty famous, and Ritchie Valens was only 8 months into like being famous. He'd only been famous for 8 months, but all of those men that died in that crash could have been extremely wealthy and famous, but Mars cut it short, so it's very interesting. And Mars kind of like stole the moment from them and sort of like cut that out, which is very, very tough. And as I mentioned before, Buddy Holly has influenced the Beatles, Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones, like all of these bands say what a huge influence Buddy Holly was and how like electrifying he was as a performer, writer, musician, everything they did. Jupiter and Scorpio, powerful legends whose memory keeps going on and on. So I do think that Jupiter and Scorpio is part of this too. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Buddy Holly's chart. So I'm going to bring his chart up. And let's get him going here. And let's look at Buddy Holly. Okay, so we'll look at his chart first. Now, Buddy Holly is, oops, I got to get rid of, oh my gosh, you guys, that alarm is horrible. Make it go away. Okay, let's get that alarm out of there. Yes, the full moon is in Aries is today, Mars energy. I saw the full moon tonight when I was walking. I was like, oh my God, look at that. Okay, so sorry about that interruption with my with my alarm. But anyway, let's look at Buddy Holly's chart. So here's his chart here. He's a Capricorn rising. He has his sun, a Sun Neptune conjunction in Virgo. Very interesting, right? Conjunction, Sun, Neptune, very artistic, very creative individual for sure. That Sun is in an opposition to Saturn. We'll talk about that. I'm not going to spend an insane amount of time on their charts, but I do want to talk about Buddy Holly's. I just want to talk, first of all, he's a Capricorn rising, Sun in Virgo. Let's look at him real quick. Let's go back and look at his picture. And you guys can tell me if you think he looks like, look at him, Capricorn rising. Look at those black framed glasses. And that's Ritchie Valens. But look at him. Doesn't he look kind of like a nerd? He kind of looks nerdy. He's a Virgo sun, tall, skinny, you know, big glasses, very much Capricorn rising, very much like with the glasses, very much Virgo sun, very tall, lanky kind of energy there, kind of a goofball kind of looking energy, but he was very serious and as a businessman, and he wanted to open up his own like record label. And he wanted to get more into the business side of music. And the only reason he went on that tour in the first place is to get some money because his royalties were all tied up. And you know, people kept trying to, when I read about his story, people kept trying to ride his gravy train and screw him over when it came to money. Now, interestingly, the ruler of the second house of money is this Saturn in Pisces in the second house. And the ruler of the eighth house of other people's money or money that he owes other people is this Sun. And so we see the second house in an opposition to the eighth house. And we see that Sun with Neptune. And I do think people were trying to rip him off. And he had been trying to part ways with his manager, who he thought was taking too much money from him. And the thing about it is the whole reason Buddy Holly went on that trip is because his royalties were tied up and his wife was pregnant and he needed money for his wife. Now, the seventh house is ruled by the moon. So we see that moon in Gemini representing his wife in an opposition to Jupiter. What's funny is Buddy Holly met his wife and he asked her out on the first date the first day he saw her. On their very first date, he asked her to marry him and that was it. So then they were married and they were a very cute couple, but you can tell like how impulsive and quick he is with things. On the first date, he's like, marry me. And then she did. And their manager was saying, you can't take your wife out on tour with you because people, you know, your female fans will not like that. And so he kind of hid his wife from his manager and said that she was the secretary of the band. And we can see Pluto in the seventh house there. He's literally hiding his wife from his manager. And normally his wife would always travel with the band. And we see that moon in Gemini opposite Jupiter in Sagittarius. So wife was always traveling with his band. We also see that moon in Gemini in a trine to Venus, which is the ruler of his 10th house of career. So his wife is in a trine to his career. So his wife really supported his career. And she would oftentimes do like, you know, she would started to do more of the bookkeeping for the business. She would do the laundry for the, you know, for them when they were on tour and things like that. So she was very useful in that way. And she would always go with him to travel too. But she didn't go on this trip with him because she was pregnant and she wasn't feeling well. And so she didn't go with him on this particular trip. Now, so what's very interesting, so he married his wife right away, very impulsive, very much like, do it now, nothing bad can happen, just go for it. And, you know, the pregnant wife, very moon Jupiter is very much like the pregnant wife. And, I can't have you traveling with me because you're pregnant. So we can kind of see those energies. The moon and Jupiter very much could be like the pregnant wife or the happy wife. But the wife wanted to travel with him. And he said, no, you can't on this one. You're pregnant. And what's so interesting, Buddy Holly had a premonition about his death before he died. And we can definitely see like a very psychic energy with him too. He has that Sun-Neptune conjunction, and the idea of him in the 8th house, right, of death, and the idea of him having a premonition about his death before he died is like really crazy. And he said he felt like so guilty in the dream for leaving his wife. Now, look at this. His wife is represented by this moon, and that moon is in a square to Saturn, right? And, and actually, this is a T square right here. His wife opposite Jupiter square Saturn. So this whole configuration right here between the moon and Jupiter and Saturn, that's a T square right there. And this moon square Saturn, it could definitely be, and especially because the moon rules the 7th house of partner, could definitely talk about feeling guilt about something and, feeling guilty because she couldn't be with him on the trip, but also feeling guilty because he left her in the premonition in the dream where he died. Isn't that straight up crazy, you guys? That is like, and then also his wife had a premonition as well, too, that he was going to die. So both of them had a premonition. And he said, like, in my dream, I felt so bad and guilty for leaving her. Moon square Saturn, definitely. And then moon opposite Jupiter and Sagittarius, like leaving, traveling, going somewhere else. And he felt so guilty for leaving. And so it's like almost like his soul recognized almost like what was coming up and what was happening, which is really very spooky. Now, the other thing I just wanted to point out was about his money and his royalties. And even though he was born into a relatively well-off family, he was getting majorly screwed when it came to money. And his planet of money is in an opposition to the planet that represents his 8th house, which is in a conjunction to Neptune. And people were coming out of the woodwork being like, oh, I'm acting like your manager, so you owe me this money. And they didn't even have a contract, but they were holding his royalties and taking his money. And so we see this hardship with the money going on with Saturn in the 2nd house opposing the ruler of the 8th house with Neptune. We see this energy around the money and how the money was not going well, even though he was at that point this famous, rock star and musician. His money was all tied up, and he was trying to get enough money to open up a record label of his own and then live in New York City with his wife where they currently lived. But he wanted to get out of the business and go out of playing and performing and go more into the business side of, being a musician and a recording artist, which you see the Capricorn rising. He wanted to go into the business side, but he kept being brutally rebuffed because of the money issues. And you can see it in his chart. And also he wasn't having access to his royalties. Now, when we think about what house would represent our royalties, that would be the 11th house. The 11th house is the 2nd house from the 10th house of career. And the 11th house represents the 2nd house from the house of career. It represents the money from our career. So the ruler of that 11th house is Mars. And Mars is in the 8th house. Again, problems with those royalties, but that Mars is also in almost an exact quincunx to that Saturn, which is the ruler of his 2nd house of money. So it's like, I'm frustrated and I can't get my royalties and I can't get my money. So I have to go on this incredibly punishing tour, right? The Sun opposition Saturn, like I have to go on this very punishing tour in order to get my money because my monies are all tied up and people are not giving me my money. So that was a major driver of why Buddy Holly even did that tour from hell and did the winter dance party. It was because his royalties were tied up. And you can see in his chart how those royalties would be tied up and how frustrating that must have been for him, especially with all those people trying to screw him over when it came to money. Okay. And so I want to next look at his chart compared to the chart of the event. Okay. So here is Buddy Holly's chart on the inside, and on the outside is the actual time that that plane took off. And so, I think it's interesting that he has Saturn rising on his ascendant along with this part of fortune. The part of fortune represents money. And so we know, like, he was on that trip for practical reasons to get money, and he was trying to build his foundation for his future businesses, and because he couldn't get the money. So that part of fortune representing money, Saturn and Capricorn really trying to lay that foundation for the future of what he was trying to do there. And all his money was tied up. Now, I want to take a little look here about his personal Uranus. So his personal Uranus is at 9 degrees Taurus in the 4th house right there. And remember how I talked about Mars and Uranus being very active when there are accidents or sudden death or things like that that happen? Mars is here in his 4th house, but it is opposing the ascendant of that event. Okay, so the ascendant, that Scorpio ascendant, when that plane took off, is in his 10th house, and it's opposing his Uranus. So that event is opposing his personal Uranus. And we already can see like something very surprising, shocking happening when it comes to his career or it comes to his work. So there already was a transit, and we're looking at the date of that the plane crash happened, like right at the moment of takeoff. That ascendant is opposite his natal Uranus. So that transit was hitting at that exact moment, causing that automatic happening. We also see Buddy Holly's Mars in Leo. Look at his Mars at 18 degrees Leo. Now, this is a day chart. Buddy Holly was born at 3:30 p.m., and this is a day chart. So in a day chart, Mars is going to be the most malefic planet, and that Mars is already in the 8th house. But we can see that Mars is in a conjunction with transiting Uranus. Okay, so not only is his natal Uranus opposing the ascendant of that event, but transiting Uranus is creeping up on his natal Mars and is about ready to make a conjunction with his natal Mars in the 8th house. It's within 4 degrees. And so, boom, like quick, impactful, try not to be crude about it, but quick, violent, impactful end going on there. And so we have that going on. We also have, at the same time too, we have transiting Uranus at 14 degrees Leo, squaring his natal Uranus at 9 degrees Taurus. Now, Buddy Holly was 22 years old, and in our early 20s, we always have that. Everyone gets a Uranus square in their early 20s. Everyone has that happen in their early 20s. But the hard part about this accident is not only is he having that natal first square in his early 20s to Uranus, that Uranus is about to hit his most malefic planet in this chart, this Mars at 18 degrees Leo in the 8th house, and it's also opposing the ascendant. So we have a big Mars-Uranus party going on again here, which is not good. And we also see that that the actual Mars for this event, Mars at 28 degrees Taurus, has just separated from a square with his natal Mars. So we have Mars square Mars. I mean, we've got Mars Uranus, Mars square Mars. We've got Mars Uranus everywhere, which is a huge sign of, something that could potentially. Now, I'm not saying if you're having a Mars Uranus conjunction, like, that's it for you. I'm just saying, like, these things are going on, so we want to pay attention to them, right? And we want to pay attention to, what's going on. Now, for him, the whole reason I mentioned he was on this tour was to get money. That Venus opposition Pluto, isn't that interesting? It's falling in his second and eighth house, which are houses that have to do with our money. And the whole reason, the music died for him was because of money, because he was on that trip. And you could argue that if that manager just would have given him his money, he wouldn't have need to be on that tour, and he might still be alive. So it's a very interesting reason. Like, the music died for him because of money. And that Venus opposition Pluto is hitting his natal houses of money. And so that's really interesting too. I'd also like to point out that I mentioned his wife was pregnant and then she miscarried. Transiting Mars is in his fifth house of children, opposite that Jupiter in Scorpio we know from the event chart. And it's hitting his fifth house, his fifth and 11th house. The fifth house, of course, having to do with children. And she did miscarry right after that. So very tough event there as well, happening with his fifth house of children. Now, the last thing I want to mention about his chart compared to the event chart here is I want us to be really careful to remember this moon in Sagittarius. Remember, I talked about it, the 9 of Wands, the void of course moon. Here it is. And that moon in Sagittarius is hitting Buddy Holly's Jupiter, natal Jupiter at 15 degrees Sagittarius. Also, that transiting moon in Sagittarius is opposing his natal moon in Gemini. So we're seeing that moon in Sagittarius is touching his own chart in a very personal way. And, with his moon opposite Jupiter, moon in Gemini, Jupiter in Sagittarius, Buddy Holly liked to be on the move and liked to go and didn't like delays, is what I think. He got married on the first date. He had a trust in life. He actually had no fear of flying, and he thought, he had no fear of traveling or flying. And he thought, small planes are cool because they can land anywhere. That was his thinking process. So he really wasn't expecting anything to happen here. And he said a little plane can land anywhere. And he was sick of being on the road, I think, and feeling guilty for not being with his wife while she was pregnant and sick with that child. Now, the moon in Sagittarius is also squaring his Saturn, again, bringing back those feelings of guilt for not being there, which we talked about earlier. So that moon in Sag at 16 degrees, again, from the event chart, majorly triggering in his own natal chart, having to do with his spouse, that baby, those feelings of guilt for not being there that I talked about. So we see all these things happening in Buddy Holly's chart. So I'm going to leave, I'm going pretty quickly through the natal charts, just kind of touching on them to give you an idea. Let me go ahead, and I want to look at the Big Bopper next. And let's go here with the Big Bopper. So the Big Bopper, I just love his name, first of all. So the Big Bopper was also on that flight because he wasn't feeling well. He wasn't supposed to be on it, but he had the flu and he was hurting so bad that he's like, I can't take another night on that rickety old bus being, sick. I just want to get in that plane and get there early and, feel better, right? So the reason he was on that, and that's going to become important to know down the road, like, why was he on that flight? Because for Buddy Holly, it was because of the money. For the Big Bopper, he was on that flight. He was on that tour for the money. Big Bopper was on that tour to spread his popularity about his song Chantilly Lace. And maybe some of you have heard. There's the Big Bopper right there. And I personally think he deserves more credit. Look at him. Isn't he funny? Here's his most famous song was Chantilly Lace. And it was like, Chantilly lace, a pretty face, da 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 da. And he was famous for like acting like he was talking on a phone. There he is right there in that photo and going, hello, baby, like that. And then the girl would pick up on the other line. And I mean, it was just so funny. And what like, he would do all these really cute, gregarious kind of things. He was a Gemini rising, and you can see he's on the phone. Hello, baby, which I think is hilarious for the Big Bopper. And there he is right there. And his actual name was Giles Perry Richardson. He's a Scorpio, but he changed his name to the Big Bopper because of a dance where you would like bop around. And he actually was a radio DJ first before he had his big hit Chantilly Lace. And let's look at him. So he is, I mean, come on, with a name like the Big Bopper, of course, this guy has the moon in Sagittarius along with Venus in Sagittarius. Now, Moon-Venus conjunction, very artistic, very, very artistic combination. And again, keep in mind, all these people that I'm showing you, they're artists, okay? And he has Venus square Neptune, he has Moon square Neptune, very idealistic, very artistic, all those types of things. But with a name like the Big Bopper, of course, he has, you know, his moon and Venus in Sagittarius. I'm like, yeah, that's totally the Big Bopper right there. And of course, he's a Gemini rising, making making like a song about being on the phone and going, hello, baby, like that. And it's interesting because his sun is in the very first degree, which is 0 degrees of Scorpio. So he's just barely a Scorpio. But a lot of people said like his song Chantilly Lace was kind of like the first song that showed like people maybe kind of heading in a direction of phone sex, which I thought was really funny. I'm like, leave it to the Scorpio, right? To answer the phone, hello, baby. I like it like that. I like it when you do this. I like it when you do that. And so I was really amused looking at his chart. And he does go really, really hard. He was actually, as a DJ on the radio, he broadcasted longer than anyone else. He literally did a broadcast for 122 hours, 6 days straight. It only took a 5-minute cold shower every day. That's a total Scorpio move right there. Yes, I love the Big Bopper too. It's so funny. And of course, as a Gemini rising, he's showing up as this Mercury in Libra in the 5th house of entertainers. And also, you know, the 3rd house is also like radio broadcasting, entertaining as well. And you can see the ruler of his 3rd house of broadcasting, et cetera, being on the radio is in the 5th house of, you know, acting, drama, things like that. And he was so funny on the radio. He would talk in funny accents. He would say the funniest things. He was very loud. And they said that, you know, when he was by himself, he was quieter or shyer or introverted. But when he got on the radio, he just like came to life and was very loud and fun. And he would make up things on the fly. You can see the ruler of his ascendant is in a square to that Jupiter in Cancer. So he liked to just be funny and make jokes and do impersonations. And he was kind of like a radio personality who came up with these really fun, catchy songs. And yeah, so I like his chart a lot. And like I said before, the Big Bopper, he was 28 years old when that plane crashed. And so he was the oldest one on that flight. And like I said, his wife was pregnant with his son at the time that plane went down. And his son was born 2 months after that plane went down. And I think it's very interesting because when we talk about the 5th house, we talk about children, right? And the ruler of the 5th house is this Mercury, which is in the 5th house. And then we see Mercury, K2, and the sun. Now, what's really interesting about the Big Bopper's son that was born after he died is he was like the Big Bopper Jr., and he would go around and do like tribute performances emulating his father. And he looks exactly like his father. So he did have like a very special son who he never got to meet, but you can see that emphasis in the fifth house of children. And you can see, like, you know, he did have a son that looked exactly like him and did performances like him. And yeah, so it's very interesting with his story and his son. People said he was a wild man when he was on air. I really think it's that moon in Sagittarius with Venus Sagittarius. He became like a wild, funny man when he would get on the air, very much improvising. And look at that moon Venus conjunction in a trine to that Uranus and Aries. Of course, he's like so improvising, funny, artistic, doing very like out there things. Like his song Chantilly Lace was like pretty out there for the 1950s. And so let's see what else here. So the Big Bopper, when he died, he only had $8 in his savings account. So he had absolutely like no money when he died. But that song Chantilly Lace became really popular after he died, and his family, including his children, grandchildren, and his wife, continued to live off the royalties from Chantilly Lace and some of his other music all the way up until now. Like they're still living off those royalties. So when we look at, you know, the wife is the seventh house here, and we can see wife is Sagittarius or Jupiter representing the wife. And we can see the wife is in his second house of money with this Pluto in a conjunction to this Pluto. Also note that Jupiter rules the 11th house of his royalties from his work. So it wasn't until after he died, Pluto, that his wife, Jupiter, got the benefit of the money from his royalties. So we see his wife in his second house of money with Pluto. After he dies, she starts getting these royalties that keep her afloat financially. So we can see kind of how his chart is working and how even after death, he was able to take care of his family financially because of those songs that he wrote before he died. So that was really good that he didn't leave her behind with nothing. You know, there was something there to help raise the kids with. And let's see what else as well, too. So I just want to talk about the ruler of his ascendant, which is this Mercury in a conjunction with K2 or the South Node. So I kind of think this was his as an artist because K2 can talk about things that are very unusual. He had like a very unusual, funny sense of humor. He was a joker with a lot of personality that liked to entertain. And that's very much like a fifth house thing, but he was kind of like different or unusual in some ways, which is very much a K2 type of thing. And let's see, what else did I want to say? Like father, like son, his son is in the fifth house of his children. His son looked exactly like him, and his son continues. And look at that connection with his son. There has to be like a past life connection with his son or a connection there, because we see the ruler of the fifth house of children in a conjunction with past life planet K2. So, you know, there is that connection there. His son exhumed his body and like wanted to have an autopsy because one was never done to see if he lived at all after the crash. And he hadn't, but when he pulled his body out of the grave, his body was like very well maintained and preserved, which we can see that the eighth house ruler, Saturn and Capricorn, very well preserved in his grave in the eighth house. Wow. I was like, that's kind of interesting. And his son was kind of a character. Like not everybody is going to exhume, take their parents out of their grave, get an autopsy on them, and then rebury them. That's a very kind of like K2 type of thing to do. Very odd and different. Hi, Shaylee. Hi there, Shaylee. Good to see you. And so anyway, another thing I wanted to point out about the Big Bopper is he really was a visionary artist. Like he could be credited with doing like the first music video back in the day. And he talked about artists having music videos for every song they had. And some of his songs did have music videos. And so when we talk about Venus Neptune, you can often talk about like visual art. And so he definitely had that aspect of being a pioneer when it came to visual art. And so we see that there too. He was probably also very romantic as well too, with that, probably something of a ladies' man. I would also say too, with that Venus in Sagittarius square Neptune, it's like, oh, okay. And we also see in his chart, we see Neptune squaring his ascendant, which can sometimes mean more susceptibility to colds or flus or things like that. If you get run down. And again, he was the one that took the seat on the plane because he had the flu at that time. So we also see that too. Also in the Big Bopper's chart, he has this Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in his second house of money is at the bending of his nodes. So the nodes here, Jupiter and Pluto are squaring the nodes, and we call that being at the bendings of the nodes, which just means, like, again, Jupiter, Pluto being very, like, it wasn't until he died that his wife was getting that money. And I think, had he stayed alive, he would have been very wealthy. And Pluto can signify wealth. Certainly, Jupiter in the second house can be very wealthy, but powerful and wealthy, Jupiter and Pluto in the second house. But it wasn't until he died, really, that any of that benefit. And that's very much like where we have the North and South node attached to that. It's like an event of fate that kind of caused that wealth to kind of come pouring in to support his family. So I think that is very interesting too. I see your comment about your South node conjunction your Uranus, Chaley. Don't worry. And again, we're looking at here, we're going to be looking at event chart. We're looking at an event chart of when something happened. If you have Uranus South node in your planet, in your own chart, you could have like really amazing, unusual talents from a past life. You could have been, really individualistic, really wanting your freedom in a past life. There's so many things with Uranus K2. It's not, so Chaley, I don't want you to think that your chart is bad or something's bad. We have to look at your whole chart. And I would never tell a client anyway, like your chart is bad. That's not, all of us have difficult things in our chart. All of us do. So please don't worry. But let's go ahead and take a look at what happened on the night of the day that the Big Bopper, the day the music died for the Big Bopper. So I think it's really interesting on this chart because here we have the Big Bopper on the inside, and then we have the event on the outside here. Now, for the Big Bopper, the ascendant for this particular event is in his sixth house of health. So remember the Scorpio ascendant from the day the music died chart, that is in his sixth house of health. And again, I mentioned before, he was on that flight because of his health, because he was actually sick and in a weakened state. And so, that ascendant is falling in his sixth house of health. He was on that flight for that reason. And we can also see transiting Neptune at the time of that accident is right on top of his sun in Scorpio. So he's having a sun-Neptune transit, which can also weaken the health and can make a person's vitality susceptible to flus, colds, and stuff like that. That's one interpretation. I don't want people with sun Neptune to be, oh my God, I'm sick, I'm dying, nothing like that. It is one interpretation of that. And, he could have been at a physically weak moment at that time with that sun Neptune conjunction. And so, I think he normally had a pretty healthy constitution because the ruler of his sixth house was that Mars, and he has Mars in Leo in the second house. That's a strong constitution. I think he has but has a stronger constitution, although the ruler of his ascendant is with Ketu, which can represent a weaker point health-wise. But I mean, he was susceptible to the cold and flu at that time that Neptune was hitting his sun. And like I said, the ascendant for the actual event in the 6th house of, illness. And he also was on that flight because of someone's generosity. We see Jupiter in the 6th house. Somebody gave up their ticket from Buddy Holly's band, gave up his ticket. He was supposed to be on that flight, but he gave it to the Big Bopper because the Big Bopper had the flu. And he's like, I feel bad for you, man. You go ahead and take that flight. So we see like Jupiter in his 6th house, he's getting that ability to be on that flight from someone's generosity because he wasn't feeling well. But obviously, that Jupiter was opposite Mars, as we said, and didn't go the way that was planned. Now we're going to look more at Uranus-Mars stuff in his chart is showing up again. So on the day of the at the moment that plane took off, the ascendant in Scorpio is in a quincunx to his natal ascendant. Again, that is a weak point for health. So we also see the ascendant here for this event that happened in Scorpio in a quincunx to his natal Uranus. So this is like a shocking event again happening, and the ascendant quincunx is natal Uranus, and also the ascendant for the event squaring his own ascendant, or not squaring, but quincunxing his own ascendant, which talks about like your physical health. Your ascendant is your physical health as well. So we can see like a change of fate or a change of events because he wasn't feeling well. We can also see this ascendant for this event here is squaring his natal Mars. So again, we see Mars showing up. Mars is the ruler of his 6th house of health. So again, the 6th house is being hit over and over again that I'm talking about here. And again, he's on that flight because of his health. And interestingly, look at this, you guys. Remember how I talked to you about that void of course moon at 16 degrees Sagittarius when I mentioned the 9 of Wands, all of that? That moon is in a conjunction with his natal moon in Sagittarius. So we saw with Buddy Holly, we saw his natal Jupiter in a conjunction with the transiting moon. And now we see so we're seeing this moon in Sagittarius is hitting all of their charts in a very, very personal way. So he too wanted to travel quickly and be more comfortable as well. And he was having a moon transit conjunction at the time of this accident. And then we also see here too, another thing you'll notice about this chart, the Big Bopper was having his Saturn return at the time of this event. And he was 28 years old. He was the oldest one on the flight, and transiting Saturn was at 3 degrees Capricorn. Here's his natal Saturn at 6 degrees Capricorn. And so he's actually having his Saturn return at the time of this event. So that is pretty crazy. I wanted to point that out. He was the oldest one on that flight. Of course, his natal Saturn is ruling his career, his 8th house, and his 9th house there. I also want to talk about, the reason why. Now, again, remember when we saw Buddy Holly's chart, I said the reason why it was the day that music died for him was because of money. He was on that trip for money. Here, this Venus-Pluto opposition, the day the music died, is falling in the 10th house and the 4th house for the Big Bopper. And why was the Big Bopper on that trip? He was on that trip because he was capitalizing on his song Chantilly Lace, which had just really reached the top of the charts. And so he's going to perform to capitalize on that. So he's on that trip for his career, where Buddy Holly was more there because he's like, I got to get this money. I'm sure the Big Bopper needed to get his money too, but, you know, he was there to capitalize on it for his career. And so we can see the reason why he was there, and the reason the music died was because of his career. And also because of, you know, him having a pregnant wife at home and his family, the fourth house, right? So that's why he was on that trip. And moon energy seems to thread and weave them all together. Yeah, DG, exactly. And I'm going to show you guys something at the end that you're going to be like, oh, wow, with that moon in Sagittarius, because I was like, what? And so, you know, at the time of his death, he was having a Venus-Neptune opposition, and his natal Venus was squaring the transiting Venus as well. So that Venus Neptune stuff was really getting triggered as well. I kind of wondered for him if he drank sometimes, or if he was kind of drinking that night. I mean, he had the flu, but was he also inebriated a little bit? I was kind of wondering that when I looked at his chart. I don't know. I don't have any evidence of that. I also saw that with Ritchie Valens' chart a little bit. So I'll show you guys that too. But you can see the Venus, his natal Venus and his natal Neptune were both being triggered by this transit as well. And so I think I am going to, and one last thing I wanted to show you guys here is K2 transiting South Node at 16 degrees Aries on his natal Uranus. So he was having a K2 transit on his natal Uranus at the time in Aries, right? At the time that flight took off. And when we see K2 with Uranus, we can see transiting K2 with Uranus, we can see a capsizing of plans, a changing of plans. It's in Aries too, so there can be mechanical failures. There can be a change in plans due to mechanical failures, you know, quick impulsive actions, changing the plans. I don't want to say it because I don't want to scare everyone, but I do have to say it, you know, shocking or violent deaths that are happening. It could be very accident prone type things happening with that Uranus and Aries retrograde. And because Aries can have to do, you know, Aries ruled by Mars can have to do with technical or mechanical issues as well. So something going on with the car or the mechanics of things, needing to be careful of that with that K2 conjunction. And, you know, I also, because I'm a believer in past lives, which, you know, you can either ascribe to or not, I kind of think the Big Bopper had an incident because this is in Aries. And you know what's interesting is that he died with his friends. And he was with Buddy Holly and Ritchie Valens, who were his friends when he died. Now, you know, this South Node here with this Uranus in his 11th house of friends makes me feel like in a past life, perhaps he also died a very sudden death. And, you know, I do think with the Venus Neptune stuff and the artist stuff that he was doing, I do feel like in this lifetime, it was very important for him to meet certain goals when it came to being an artist or taking the path of an artist, because originally he was going to be a lawyer, which is a very Saturn and Capricorn type of a career, right? Saturn ruling the 10th house of career. That would be, he wanted to be in law enforcement or be a lawyer, things like that. That's very Saturn and Capricorn, but you see the longing of his soul to be an artist, right? He has that moon Venus square Neptune. His moon and Venus are in a trine to that Uranus. Like, I do feel his soul had a mission to fulfill when it came to like being an artist and putting his art out there. And perhaps in a past life that was cut short, or perhaps in a past life he wasn't able to do that. You know, if he was Aries, we could talk about somebody who was like in a war or died a hard death in a past life, or a sudden death because of war, something like that. Okay. again, I don't want to scare people, but I got to tell you what I'm feeling. And, I do feel his soul had an important mission in this lifetime to be an artist and to exemplify an artist. And I do think there's a reason why that transiting Venus and Pisces exalted is up there in his 10th house of career, because I do think that artist getting to that level was like so important for him. But like once it happened, it's like it happened again, and he was taken out of this life like very suddenly again, which may have been a repeat from a past life. And Sparkles of Gold is here. It is a true party. It is 10:45, my friends. I'm way past my bedtime. I'm catching my night owls here. And DG says, I would have been drinking if I was them too. Yeah, no doubt, right? Because like you're on this horrible tour from hell. And so I think the Big Bopper's chart is really interesting because he's a true artist and he did get to live out some of that dream before he passed. But again, he was taken very suddenly, and we see the nodes on his Uranus there. The nodes are flashing on his Uranus and Aries, taking him out, kind of took him out of this life very quickly. And interesting, he was having a Saturn return at the time that this happened. So but I just want to say, I love the Big Bopper. I love his chart. I think it's freaking amazing. He seemed like an amazing person, and everybody said that he was like awesome, Moon in Sagittarius with Venus in Sagittarius trine Uranus. What a hoot to be around. What a funny dude. And it's too bad that we lost him so early. So let's go ahead and we will also look at, we're going to look at Ritchie Valens, and Ritchie is the last one. So we've been through Buddy Holly, we've been through the Big Bopper, and then the last person on that flight was Ritchie Valens. And for those of you who know the song La Bamba, he also had a song called Donna. He had Come On, Let's Go. So interesting with Ritchie Valens. What an amazing talent. He was only 17 years old when he died. Very sad. And he'd only been enjoying about 8 months of fame when he died. He had like his whole career in front of him. He wasn't even 18 years old yet. And, but yet his talent was like epic, next level. And, let's look at Sparkles of Gold is here. DG, yes. R.I.P. the Big Bopper. I know. His photo was so funny. I love looking at his photo. I love a good like Gemini Sagittarius funny thing going on. I love that. So Ritchie Valens. So again, he was born May 13th, 1941, Taurus. He's got 4 planets in Taurus. Would you guys look at that? Isn't that wild? Let me draw there. Actually, no, he's got 5 planets in Taurus. He's not 4, he's got 5. What a Taurus. Okay. He's also an Aquarius rising. So lots of fixed energy, stubborn, dedicated, working hard. Sun Saturn conjunction, no stranger to working hard. And let's look at Ritchie Valens' picture because he looks like a Taurus. Doesn't he look like a Taurus? He looks like a Sagittarius. He's got the like big wide forehead and his hello baby. That's the Big Bopper. But Ritchie Valens does look like a Taurus to me. Like his face kind of looks like a Taurus to me. His cheekbones, there he is right there. Doesn't he look like a Taurus, kind of beefy? Tauruses were kind of beefy like that. He's got the cheeks going on. 17 years old, handsome. There he is right there. And Ritchie Valens, what's interesting, there's so many interesting things about him, but just to name a few. So he is known as the pioneer of Chicano rock. And basically he was one of the first Latino artists to really break into the rock scene, because the rock scene at that time was like very whitewashed. It was just like a lot of white people. And, he had this amazing talent, and he did grow up he started playing music when he was 5 years old, and he taught himself how to play. But so he knew he wanted to do music early on, and he was already doing a bunch of stuff with music early on. But he took and he was, from a Latino culture. He grew up in Los Angeles, Latino family. He took his culture and blended it with rock and roll. And he was really like the first person to do that. And so many people followed after him, like Selena, the Latino recording artist. Like there's so many of them you could name. Also, people like Carlos Santana took a lot of inspiration from Ritchie Valens, basically loving his guitar. He was like a guitar virtuoso, and he was probably a better guitar player than Buddy Holly or the Big Bopper. He was like technically an amazing guitar player, and people like Carlos Santana looked up to him. Jimi Hendrix looks up to him and said he was an influence on him. Like, Ritchie Valens was only 17 years old when he died, and look at what an influence, what a powerful influence and a pioneer that he was. And when we look at, somebody who's a pioneering person who does things first, who's on like the cutting edge of things, we can really look at a Mars rising person, can't we? And he has Mars rising on his ascendant, and people calling him, the forefather or the pioneer of Chicano rock, and, blending the different cultures together, like being the first to do that. Also, Ritchie Valens, it's like he put so much of his life into those 17 years. He shoved so much into those 17 years, and his life went by fast and it was over. But he was like this huge pioneer force. And that is very much like a Mars rising type of thing. Now, the other thing, his story hits my heart. Oh, I know. Me too. Yes, I love it too. And one of my favorite movies, La Bamba, right? I love that movie too. Very interesting. I had my firstborn child, Skylar. Oh, I'm sorry, Chaylee. It says, I love Ritchie. It was the song Donna that had a huge, Donna. He actually wrote Donna for his girlfriend at the time. And, leave it to a Taurus who is like, gung-ho, like, this is my person and I'm, never going to let him go. Like he writes a love song when he's 15 years old for his girlfriend that he, wants to be with, and it goes completely like famous. Christy Stone, I know La Bamba by heart. Oh, I know. I love that song too. My uncles on my dad's side used to sing me that song when I was younger. So it's really close to my heart too. And yes, Taurus, love the energy. And his story really hits people's heart. And even though he only recorded like a handful of songs before he died, he's in the cultural museum, like his La Bamba, they made that a part of the National Congress of Cultural History. So hugely important moment for Latinos in rock and roll, and Ritchie Valens on the brink of it. Like how exciting. Like I just get this feeling of excitement with his chart, and you can see like what a trailblazer, what a pioneer he was. And so I want to also, so where to start first with Ritchie Valens? So one really interesting fact about him. So he won his seat on the plane that crashed in a coin toss. So all night he kept, and actually what's really interesting is Ritchie Valens was afraid of flying. Because when he was 15 years old, there were two planes that exploded in the sky above his junior high school. And like the remains of it like came down on everyone on the playground, and a couple people actually were killed from that. And so he had a fear of flying from the time he was 15 years old. So you have to kind of go, okay, what made a person that actually kind of had a fear of flying go around and, ask multiple times to be included on this flight? So that's kind of interesting to me. And, Ritchie Valens, like he's got all the Taurus, he's got 5 planets in Taurus, he's Aquarius rising. So we're talking about somebody in Mars rising. We're talking about somebody who's like very persistent, right? And somebody who probably could be a little bit stubborn at times. And like they said the whole night that he was going up to different band members of Buddy Holly and saying, can I fly? Can I fly? Can I fly? Can I take your seat on the plane? Can I take it on the plane? Can I have your seat? And, that like very persistent, going energy, like, can I have your ticket? Can I have your ticket? Like he finally wore down Tommy Alsop, who is Buddy Holly's guitarist. He finally wore him down at the end of the evening. And Buddy Holly's guitarist was supposed to be on that flight, but he told Ritchie Valens at the last minute at the end of the night, let's do a coin toss. We'll flip a coin. Because I guess he kept going up to him over and over and over, which is very, Taurus, Aquarius, fixed sign, go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 over and over. So they flipped a coin and Ritchie Valens called it and he said heads. And he flipped the coin, Tommy flipped the coin and it came up heads. And so that's how he got his ticket onto that plane. He won it in a coin toss. And I think it's really interesting. Like, it's kind of funny to me that he called heads because, of course, Mars, Aries, the first house, all associated with the head. And after he died many years later, Tommy, the guitarist who he won the ticket from in the coin toss, opened up a saloon called Heads Up Saloon in honor of Ritchie Valens. And it was kind of funny to me because I'm like, okay, it's Mars rising, heads up, he calls heads, he gets on the flight. And the other thing that I want to point out to you guys too, really quickly, is look at this. So at the time, Ritchie Valens was born at 12:56 a.m. And the night that plane took off at 12:55 a.m. So that plane took off within a minute to the minute of the time that he was born. So basically that plane took off at 12:55 a.m. and he was born at 12:56 a.m. Isn't that kind of wild? I thought that was kind of wild. Like there's 1 minute in between there, like between the birth time and the time that flight took off. So it's kind of crazy. And, oh, good to see you, Sparkles of Gold. Good to see you. And yeah, it's so cool. Christy is saying, so amazing, Shaylee. That is so bizarre. It makes me think of Alanis Morissette's song, Ironic. Yeah, gonna watch La Bamba. Heads Up Saloon. It meant everything. Yeah, so interesting with him in the Big Bopper, not even supposed to be on that flight, right? Very, very interesting. So Ritchie Valens, he wins the coin toss, he gets on the flight, and that he's a minute off from his birth time of when he gets on that flight. I just think it's kind of crazy. Now, one thing I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about Ritchie Valens as well is that, as I mentioned, he was an amazing guitarist and he was left-handed, but he taught himself how to play guitar with his right hand. So even though he was left-handed, he could play a right-handed guitar, which is absolutely crazy. It just adds to the genius of his guitar playing and like how like ambitious he was, but also how dexterous he was, or like ambidextrous, right? And you can see, like when you're talking about guitar playing or something very technical like that, where you have to be really fast with your fingers and you have to think and put the music together with it, that's very much Mercury, that's a Mercury thing. And being ambidextrous, if I can say that word, he was, and he picked up right-handed guitar, although he wrote with his left hand. And he has Mercury at 0 degrees Gemini. Now, Mercury's in domicile in Gemini. Mercury is very strong in Gemini. It's at 0 degrees, very strong Mercury. And not only that, that Mercury is in the 3rd house of, learning and thinking. And the 3rd house and the 5th house are the 2 houses that I would associate with, music and entertaining and talent with music. And so you can see like him picking up that guitar, teaching himself and learning everything right away. And like what a technical master he was already at 17 years old. Absolutely amazing. The other thing I will say is that he has Venus in Taurus. And people talked about his voice all the time. Like for 17 years old, like he had such a rich voice, such an amazing voice and like vocal talent. And of course, Venus is in domicile in Taurus. And I have to tell you guys, like I've known a lot of musicians over the years, and the ones that can sing really well inevitably have Venus in Taurus, like the ones that have the amazing voices. Of course, the Taurus, the throat area, Venus artist and the voice and everything, like hugely amazing voice as well, very rich voice. And you can see, you know, Venus in Taurus is in a conjunction with Jupiter, very strong for an artist. That is a very, very strong position for an artist right there. And so the fact that he has Venus in Taurus and like such an amazing voice, I was like, of course, you know, of course he does. And yeah, and what a moon placement too. Yes, you guys, again, we've been talking about the moon in Sagittarius all night, haven't we? And what do we find again? Another moon in Sagittarius, right? The Big Bopper had the moon in Sagittarius. And Buddy Holly's moon was in Gemini, but it was opposite to the moon in Sagittarius from the time that they took off on that plane, and his Jupiter was in a conjunction with that moon in Sagittarius. So Buddy Holly is there too with his moon. We've got another moon in Sagittarius, and the moon in Sagittarius in the 10th house of career, like that's very dynamic, like very like, you know, wanting to be a part of things, traveling for work a lot. You know, like him being very optimistic and excited about his career, being happy to go different places. Like he even got to go to Hawaii before he died. Again, he was only 17 years old, but you can just see like how much he appreciated traveling and going places and doing things for his career. And I kind of wonder if on that night, even though he was afraid of flying, I kind of wonder if he was like having FOMO, you know, because everybody was excited about, of course, he didn't want to be on that crappy bus anymore. But also too, I wondered if he was kind of having FOMO, like everyone's going on the plane. I want to go on the plane too. You know, he's 17 years old. He's having FOMO. I also think like, you know, the moon in Sagittarius in the 10th house is he needs a lot of freedom, and he needs like an ability to roam and do his own thing in his career. But what really struck me too is that Ritchie Valens was only 17 years old again, and there was no adult there. You know, as far as I know, his parents weren't there. Nobody was there. Like, I don't know, maybe this 17-year-old shouldn't get on the plane. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's like, who is really like, because I have a feeling like if a parent was there, they probably would have been like, no, you're not going to get on that plane. But he was literally there on his own. So we see that kind of like freedom and independence and kind of doing whatever. Again, he has his sun in a conjunction with Uranus. So of course, there's going to be, you know, wanting independence, needing independence. He's got Mars rising. I want to go do things on my own. Moon in Sagittarius in the 10th house. Let me go, let me go, let me go on the plane. Can I go? Can I go? Can I go? You know, that type of thing. And I think the Gemini moons are geniuses. Yeah, I love the Gemini moon. I mean, it's a hard position, a little bit of a hard position for the moon, because the moon is like very sensitive and Gemini is very, you know, mentally oriented. And so they kind of want different things, but it's a really cool, I think it's cool. And I love Sagittarius. Like personally, I wished I could have been a Sagittarius. I'm a Taurus, but I was like, I wish I was a Sagittarius my whole life. But anyway, so the moon in Sagittarius, I love, but, you know, him traveling for work, doing things like that, never staying in one place, being on his own a lot. To me, his chart does reflect that independence. He also has the ruler of the second house of money in his first house, which says, you know, had he lived longer, he would have probably wanted to be an entrepreneur, be in control of his own money. do his own thing. Like, that's what I see for Ritchie Valens. And one other thing I want to touch on too was his girlfriend, Donna. So he did have a girlfriend, and the traveling and things like that did take a toll on the relationship. But he did love Donna, and he wrote a song for her called Donna. And we can see the ruler of the seventh house here is the sun. And actually, it was a little bit sad because Donna, his girlfriend, so you can see the girlfriend is in a conjunction with Saturn. And Donna's father, Donna came from a very traditional, like, Caucasian home, and her father didn't approve of her going out with a Hispanic guy. And that caused a lot of tension in the relationship. And we see that Sun Saturn kind of traditional thing. So his partner's in a conjunction with Saturn, saying, I'm limited from seeing the person I like, or I can't be with the person that I like. There's limitations on that because my person's from a very traditional family who isn't approving. And if you want to talk about disapproving fathers, like, that is the definition of Sun Saturn, is like a disapproving father. And when Donna is still alive, I believe, but like, when she's talked about it, she said it was sad because her father was not accepting of the relationship, but Ritchie was like the best guy ever. He was like very, very sweet. And we see that Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Taurus, very sweet energy. And, and we can also see here too, with Ritchie Valens' sun being caught between Saturn and Uranus. Now, so we have Saturn, Sun, Uranus, all squished together like that. And that's kind of like, here I am, and I'm stuck between the old Saturn and the new Uranus, right? And Ritchie's life really did straddle that, because remember I said he was a pioneer who took, like, traditionally Latino culture wasn't really involved in rock and roll, but he was a person that essentially changed that and moved that over to blend that together. And so you can see he's right in between those titanic energies of Saturn and Uranus, which Saturn is wanting the older and the traditional, and Uranus is wanting the newness and the freedom. So we see that push-pull energy. And because the sun is the ruler of his seventh house, that push-pull energy of newness versus tradition probably was also showing up in his partnerships, because of the father not wanting not wanting him to date, or not wanting his daughter to date a Hispanic man. There were these things going on at that time. And, he was there trying to break those stereotypes and do new things. So I think that is very interesting. Hi, Garna Goddess. Garna Goddess is here and is commenting. She is a Gemini moon. Yeah. Smart, but a little neurotic. I love it. I love it. My boyfriend's a Gemini moon. So here we go. He's a double Gemini. But anyway, Sagittarius is great. Yes, Shaylee, I agree. And so we can see Ritchie Valens' chart. Like, what an artist, what an amazing artist who, like, changed things, had an amazing voice, was a huge pioneer, Mars rising. We see that moon in Sagittarius. So I think that was about it that I wanted to share. Now I just want to show you guys the day that this happened and what was going on with Ritchie's chart. Okay, so we have here on the inside, we have Ritchie's chart, and on the outside, we have the event and what happened. Okay, so and it's interesting, how I was saying, like, with the Venus-Pluto opposition and the day that the music died, and like why everyone was there at that time, we see the Venus-Pluto there in the first house and the seventh house of relationships. So, he was just becoming popular at that time. Ritchie Valens had only been famous for about 8 months before he passed away. And so, he is an artist with Venus in the first house, was just starting to get noticed, but him being gone all the time did put a lot of pressure on his relationships, and it was hard for him to maintain his relationship with Donna because he was gone. So we see that Venus Pluto happening in his 1st and 7th house on the day that the music died. So very interesting there for him. And for Ritchie, the ascendant of the event is in his 8th house in a conjunction with Neptune there. So in that 8th house of death and transformation, we see it there. We also see this ascendant in a square to his natal Pluto. And, you know, one of the biggest things I wrote about here actually is this, I want to show you guys, is remember the Mars Jupiter from from the event chart where we had Mars opposition Jupiter. That is hitting Ritchie Valens chart right down the center of that 3rd house and 9th house, which of course 3rd and 9th is about travel. Now, again, he won that ticket in a lucky coin toss. And we can see that Jupiter in the 9th house of luck. You know, that's how he won that. But again, it's opposite that Mars. And so, you know, that luck was stopped, or that potential for growth was stopped, but he did win it in a lucky coin toss. So we see that happening there. Now, what's interesting is Ritchie Valens also has a Mars Jupiter square in his natal chart. That Mars is squaring his own natal Jupiter. So he has a big Mars Jupiter thing happening in his own chart. But then the transit at that moment is also layering in another level of Mars Jupiter. So we see Mars Jupiter over and over in his chart. And Mars Jupiter, it's interesting because Mars Jupiter, especially when it's opposing and in that last degree of Scorpio there, that can really talk about achievement being cut short, you know, because Mars has a function of cutting. Mars is like cutting something off. And this Mars in his natal chart is square to this Jupiter. Now, the Jupiter rules his 10th house and a 10th house of career. And so his career was cut short. We also see that Mars in a square to this Venus right here. And so his career is an art, you know, Venus being the planet of artist, his career as an artist is cut short. His actual career is cut short. So we see that cutting energy of Mars coming in where things are just being cut short. And that's the tough chart. That's the tough part about his chart, because there's a lot of potential here. And with Mars Jupiter, there's a lot of ambition. There's a lot of like energy. There's a lot of willingness to go the extra mile. There's a lot of like, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep working hard. That Mars Jupiter energy. But Chaley is saying, I have a friend who's a Scorpio with a Gemini. I wish Valens had lived longer. He's such an icon and would have had an even huger impact on rock and roll if he would survived into adulthood, 100%, right? And that Mars energy on his ascendant, just cutting everything off for him. And, you know, Jupiter has to do with potential and growth, but that Jupiter is opposite his natal Mars, right? So this Jupiter in Scorpio that he won in that coin toss is opposite his natal Mars. It's also opposite Uranus, okay? And transiting Mars is also on top of his natal Uranus. So we're seeing, again, another Mars-Uranus thing going on here. And his natal Mars is also in a square to transiting Mars and transiting Jupiter. So again, we see these Mars-Uranus, Mars-Jupiter, we see these repeating patterns coming up. And when I talked about Mars Jupiter, because Jupiter represents achievement, great achievement in something, like you're a legend, you reach like this amazing status, like you're a guru, you're at the top of something, right? So Jupiter is all about that potential for growth, and Mars is about cutting things. And so we see that Mars Jupiter cutting right across his 3rd and 9th house of, you know, travel. And we see it cutting there right against his natal Jupiter. He's having a Jupiter opposition at that time as well, too. So it's like, you know, achievement is cut short. And, you know, Mars Jupiter could represent ambitious men who have a lot of potential. But with that opposition, it's like an ambitious man whose time was cut short. And, you know, Jupiter has to do with good fortune. Mars is about, you know, forceful. Mars can be very forceful and devastating at times. And Mars is great because we need the courage to do things. And I don't think Ritchie Valens was lacking in courage in any way whatsoever. You know, I think he was on it in life. I think he was really going for it. And, you know, that may have kind of been what got him in trouble at the end of the day. And also that moon in Sagittarius may have also been what got him in trouble as well, too, because again, I mentioned there was really no adult there, like supervising him or saying, no, you can't get on a plane at 2:55 at midnight. You know, I'm sure if any of us was his mother, we would have not let him done that. You know, we would have driven him in our own car. But, you know, he was 17 years old there by himself. He wanted to go on the plane. And again, remember I talked about the Sagittarius moon, the night that they died, that 16 degrees Sagittarius moon, the 9 of Wands that I referenced. Again, look at it. It's in a conjunction with his natal moon and wanting to travel with more luxury or more comfort or wanting excited. I feel like for him, it was more like a FOMO thing of like, I want to go on the plane. Let me go on the plane. Let me go on the plane. And then finally he wore down, you know, Tommy, and Tommy's like, okay, we'll flip a coin. And he just happened to win. And that Jupiter is in his 9th house of luck. But then we see everything being cut short with that Mars. So that's very challenging there. And let's see what else we have going on and see here. So we have his, as I mentioned earlier, his natal Mars was in a square to transiting Mars. So we see the Mars energy there. We have his natal Uranus in a conjunction with transiting Mars. And we also see Uranus, transiting Uranus here, squaring his natal Saturn. And remember, Saturn is the ruler of his ascendant. So that also represents him. That Saturn represents him. So we see all this action again with Mars square Mars, Mars Uranus, Mars to the planet that represents the Uranus to the person that represents the charge. Like we're seeing these patterns over and over again repeating, and we're seeing the moon in Sagittarius coming back and back and back. And so I think it's very interesting. Now, Ritchie Valens didn't make it to 18 years old, and you can see the nodes here, the North Node in Libra, the transiting nodes were in Aries and Libra at the time, which is kind of funny. I'm talking about them right now because the nodes are in Mars, are in Libra and Aries right now, but the nodes move backwards. And so he hadn't even had his first nodal return yet because our nodes return to our natal position every 18 years. He hadn't even had that yet because he died before his 18th birthday. So that's really sad. But I loved doing his chart, and I loved, like, I was very energized doing his chart. I think he had a very energetic chart and a lot of ambition to do things. And of course, that time got cut short. And let me show you guys, I have one last thing to show you guys here that's going to blow your minds. Okay. And, I want to put all of them together. Okay. Look at this. This is all of them together. So this is the Big Bopper, Ritchie Valens, and Buddy Holly, plus the day that the music died. So this is all 4 of their charts together laid on top of each other here. It looks like a hot mess, right? But if you zero in, and this is how I started noticing all this moon and Sagittarius stuff going on, is because of right here. So here's the day the music died, moon at 16 Sag. Okay, here's Ritchie Valens, moon in Sagittarius at 22 degrees Sag. Here is the Big Bopper's moon at 11 Sag. And here is Buddy Holly's Jupiter at 15 degrees Sag. And here is Buddy Holly's moon in Gemini opposition that moon in Sagittarius. Isn't that wild, you guys? Also, Buddy Holly's ascendant in his chart, or no, that is, that's the Big Bopper. The Big Bopper's ascendant is opposite to that moon in Sagittarius as well. Look at that line across between all four charts, hitting Gemini and Sagittarius right at the same spot. Isn't that wild? That is wild. And when we talk about moon and Sagittarius, we can really talk about like going on a journey together. And this whole thing of all of them getting on that plane together and kind of like going on a journey together. I think that that's a really interesting concept of, you know, them wanting to be comfortable, wanting to get somewhere faster, but that aspect is there, but also like their souls going on a journey together, which is fascinating to me to see all that moon and Sagittarius stuff along with, you know, the Big Bopper's ascendant hitting that degree, Buddy Holly's moon opposite that degree, like they're on a journey together. And it just seems like when you look at it from this position, it all looks, you know, very fated. And yeah, it is very wild. Thank you, DG. DG says, amazing work. Thank you so much. This event has been very influential for my journey. Oh, I'm so happy. I am so happy, you guys. Thank you so much for being here. Namaste to everyone. And I hope you enjoyed this astrological case study. And we'll see you again next time for the next one, okay? Thank you so much, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.